All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to continue our work getting into the pre-algebra stuff this week. And our objective for today is that students will be able to create a table, equation, and graph, and a written description to model a visual pattern. Okay, so the idea is that over the next couple of days, we're going to be looking at a couple of visual patterns, kind of like we did 2 weeks ago, where we saw those exponential ones. But these patterns are going to end up being linear because that's mostly what we're studying this unit, if you remember what that is, right? Now, you can see that we have a pattern down here. It says case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4. So this one I think is pretty simple to see what's happening here, but we're going to use this simple example to kind of go over a couple of things so that you can try and apply this to examples that start to look a little bit more complex but aren't that hard yet, all right? Now, in math, we use a lot of different examples or a lot of different kind of like techniques to display information, right? Sometimes you use a table, sometimes you make a graph, sometimes you make an equation, but the idea is that they all can be used to represent the same information, right? So that's what we're going to try and do today is we're going to look at this pattern here, and over today and tomorrow, we're going to make a table, an equation, a graph, and a written description to represent how this pattern is changing, okay? And as we're working through this, some questions that you just might want to think about are, how do you see the shapes changing as the case number increases? Where do you see the new squares being added to? How do you see the shape changing as the case number decreases, so working the backwards direction? And then what would maybe like, the 20th case look like based on what you see here? So first thing is trying to visualize this pattern, trying to see how it's changing by drawing out the first couple of cases. So we already see over here, we have case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4. So based on what you see there, you're going to use the space that you see here to try and recreate those patterns, right? And the way that you can do that is just by coloring in these squares, right? So let's say, for example, I wanted to say case 1 has 1 square. I'm going to go to the paint bucket on the top right and just whatever, pick your favorite color. Let's say you want it to be purple. Boom, that's case 1, it has 1 square. Now I might say, okay, let's look back at case 2. Case 2 has 2 squares. So where am I going to put these 2 squares? Am I going to put them anywhere? Or would I put like, a square here and then a square down here? Does that look like it represents the pattern? No, right? So based on where you did case 1, how are you going to draw case 2, right? And then the same thing, draw case 3, case 4. You're going to go all the way up to case 10, right? You can pause the video, take a couple of minutes to draw those out. This shouldn't take you more than, I'd say, 6 minutes or so, right? Once you're done with that, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a table, right? So what we had above was a visual representation of how that pattern grows, right? I could keep drawing it. The pattern's pretty simple. You could draw up to case 20 if you had a big enough piece of paper, case 30, however big you want it to go. But that takes up a lot of space, right? So something that we do sometimes is in math, we make a table to try and just take the numerical data and put it together in a place that's actually that's going to take up a lot less space than it would to draw that out over and over again. So the first thing we have to figure out, though, is what numerical information is there, right? When we're looking at it, I see some numbers, right? What are the numbers that you see represent? And then there's something else that you can count up here, right? So I want you to just write down there, what 2 pieces of numerical data can we keep track of there, right? Pause the video, just write that out in the sentence. Doesn't have to be anything too fancy. Now, for the next part, right, we should have identified the 2 pieces of numerical information as the case number and then the number of squares at that case number. That's the numerical information that we're going to be tracking. So case number 1, case number 2, case number 3, case number 4. We're going to track how many squares we have at each case, all right? So all you're going to have to do is look back at the pictures that you drew, and it shouldn't take too long for you to realize the pattern, right? We'll say case 1 had 1 square. How many squares did case 2 have? How many squares did case 3 have? And so on, all right? Fill out this table here. This table should not take you more than 2 minutes, right? Now, next thing that you're going to do is make a written description. So look back to the table that you have here, right? This table, although it does capture the numerical information from that pattern, it's kind of missing something, right? So think if you told somebody, okay, so this pattern has, at case number 1, 1 square. At case number 9, however many squares you said here, right? You were able to tell them how many squares are in each case number, but would they be able to recreate the pattern based on only knowing that information, right? So if you told them, you know, case 10 has this number of squares, and that's all you said, would they accurately be able to make up that pattern by filling in, you know, the right squares here, right? Probably not. So the idea for this part is just trying to be specific in describing how that pattern is changing. So I want you to use this space here and just type in a couple of sentences to describe 2 things. First, describe how the number of squares is changing as the case number changes, and then also be specific in describing where you're adding those squares so that somebody that wants to recreate the pattern could recreate it. Again, you want to be as specific as you can here, right? So pause the video, take a second to do that. And then the last thing that we're going to do for today, again, tomorrow we're going to get into some of those other representations, but I want you guys to start thinking about negative case numbers, right? So in the real world, it doesn't always make sense to think about things that are negative, right? Especially if you think about squares, right? What would a negative square look like? But when you fill out that table, because we recognize the pattern, it should be possible to figure out how many squares you should have at, for instance, case number 0, case number -1, -2, -3. So write those numbers in for there. And then what I want you to think about is visually with your diagram. Can you think of some way that you could represent a negative case number with that negative number of squares, right? Get creative. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. There's no right or wrong way. I just want to see what people are thinking, all right? And then on the next 2 pages, just like we did before, you're going to start with case number 2, case number 1, just like you did before, and then just start going into some of the negative case numbers. So you can, I want to see how you're expressing that pattern visually, right? How are you differentiating between case number 2 that has positive squares and case number -1 that has negative squares, right? So that's it for today. Tomorrow we're going to get into looking at making an equation to represent this, using the equation to represent this, and then also making a graph, right? And the next day I'm going to give you guys a different pattern, and you're going to do all of this on your own. So I want to make sure that you actually understand this stuff really well. All right? Good luck. I'll see you during the Zoom session.